So just to begin and get us started, I'm going to introduce Iain, who is our community chef, Iain Mcclellan. Can you just tell us a little bit, Iain, about what your job is with Greener Kirkcaldy?
Well, as Craig said, we look to raise awareness and try and combat climate change and food insecurity and poverty. So my job here is primarily to reduce food waste. So we take all food from supermarkets, produce any meals and distribute it to people. We run cooking classes to try and help people along, and that's an interesting job. It's good.
Perfect. I always say, I say at all of our events, Iain's our most popular member of staff because he gives people lots of really, really tasty food to eat. So yeah, it's an easy job, really, isn't it, Iain?
That's simple.
So thinking a bit more about vegetarian cooking then. So, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that when you went to a restaurant, you would struggle to find any vegetarian options on a menu, but these days it seems to be much better for non-meat eaters. Do you think that there's been a kind of shift in the way that professional chefs think about vegetarian cooking now?
I'd say they're getting there. I was a head chef for 10 years in a busy restaurant, and I could reflect back thinking maybe two vegetarian dishes on a menu was probably sufficient. But as time went on, I realised that a little bit more effort needs to be put in, and it doesn't happen everywhere. But there's certainly a shift, recognising that there's a demand for meat-free dishes. It does test the chef, though, definitely.
Yeah, I seem to notice that it goes through trends. Like macaroni cheese seems to be in at the moment in UK menus. I don't know if you all have secret meetings to agree this.
It's big in America as well. Mac and cheese, I would have to say, is a comforting dish, and if it's done right, it's really, really good.
And it seems that like many people who don't cook with vegetables that much and kind of err on the side of meat, they seem to think that cooking with vegetables is maybe a bit more tricky, and maybe the results aren't going to be as tasty. Do you think there's any truth to any of that?
There's certainly an element of truth. People's food awareness, if you're choosing to remove a foodstuff from your diet, then you do need to replace it with something else, which can be challenging if it's unfamiliar ingredients. This is the idea of this workshop, to make people aware that there's other options available to meat, but still a satisfying and tasty dish.
Yeah, so it's more about telling people what they can do, isn't it, and making them more confident, I suppose, isn't it?
Definitely.
And if I had to push you for your favourite vegetarian dish or your favourite vegetarian ingredient, what do you think that would be? And please don't say sprouts.
Well, we're into the new year now, so I'll give people a break for Brussels sprouts till next November. But cauliflower, I would have to say, is one of my favourite vegetables across the board, and it features in one of the recipes later. One of my favourite ways to eat cauliflower.
Perfect. Okay, thanks for now, Iain. We'll come back to you when it's time for our first recipe. But I just want to begin this next bit by thinking about why we eat so much meat in the UK, and collectively why we tend to think that a meal isn't complete without meat on the plate. So I'm just going to share my screen if this all goes to plan. So in the UK, we eat about 84.3 kilograms of meat on average per person every year. So that's about the same weight as me and a third, basically. And we just seem tied to this idea that we've got to have meat on our plate. And eating meat is seen as the norm. Being vegetarian or vegan is kind of the exception and often become the butt of the joke. Now, like we've just mentioned, it maybe is changing a little bit and more awareness is out there. But there actually are a number of different reasons that people give when you ask them as to why they don't eat so much veg, why they are tied to this idea of meat. And some of these ideas actually are maybe ingrained in us from a cultural point of view. So the first thing that people say when you ask them why they don't cook veggie-only dishes is that they don't think that there's going to be enough nutrition in the vegetarian meal. And they have health concerns that by cutting down on meat, they're not going to get everything in their diet that they need to be healthy. And there's a particular concern around a lack of protein. And this is especially true of people with children. I think this idea that eat meat and you'll grow up big and strong is still there in our minds. And also the kind of linked idea that maybe a meat-free dish won't be as filling as one that contains meat. So that's one reason. The next I think we touched on as well is just a lack of familiarity and confidence of cooking with veggies. I think people believe that it's less convenient, will require more time and new skills that people don't have, which is exactly why we run our workshops and we put on events like this to show that actually it's just as easy to cook with veg. Now, the idea as well that taste is going to be a problem, that maybe the food without meat in it isn't going to taste as good. And perhaps this one is tied to our cultural heritage, that as a nation in the UK, we are used to the smell and texture of cooking meat. If you think of traditional food, maybe that our grandparents or our great-grandparents might have eaten, then you think of a little bit of cheap meat and some veggies on the side, maybe some potatoes from the garden. And I think we still have tied to that kind of way of cooking because it's not that long ago, really. Another reason could be a second cultural reason. It could be that meat is linked to success. And this is an idea that goes back centuries, where the ruling classes, the wealthy, ate a lot more meat because they could afford it, whereas those regular folk didn't eat as much. And even it's tied to our language. So we eat beef, we don't eat cow. And the reason we eat beef is from the French word boeuf, which would have the language of the Norman invaders who were the ruling class at one time. And that is still in our language and we still call it beef. And this idea of meat and success is out there globally, and meat and wealth. So there is a trend in the developing world to eat more meat, and that's because they are looking to the more wealthy countries, and they are wanting to copy our ways. And we've not really led them down a sensible route really there, because if they eat as much meat as us, then that's going to lead us to problems down the line. And the final one there is studies that have been done recently have found a link between meat and masculinity. So the idea is that to be a real man, you need to be muscly. And to build muscle, you need lots of protein. And to many people, meat is the main, if not the only, source of protein. And it's backed up by the stats. So the stats tell us that 60% of men exceed their current guidance for red and processed meats. And that's compared to only 25% of women. And we also find that 2/3 of vegans are female. And you may even have noticed brands are really leaning into this protein idea at the moment. Over the last couple of years, you'll see that in their marketing, they're forefronting protein on the packaging, in their ads. And despite the fact that their recipes haven't changed at all, but they've recognized that out there is this link between protein and masculinity and protein and meat. So that is the reasons that we find why people really are tied to this idea of eating meat. And it seems that switching to plant-based isn't just like a simple decision when you're making your shopping list and going to the shops. It's actually maybe challenging our identities as Scottish/British or American, I don't know, and also of being successful or even of being a man. So that's quite a big thing to go against, but recently there does seem to be a bit of a change against these more traditional views, and cutting down the meat is becoming more normal and more common. And we're seeing mainstream adverts on TV for corn and meat-free products. We've seen big stars in those adverts as well, like Mo Farah. And the phrase plant-based seems to be coming into regular use, maybe as a replacement for vegan or vegetarian, which maybe is a bit of a turn-off for some people. This plant-based word seems to be everywhere. And at this time of year, every year, Veganuary gets quite a lot of coverage in the press, which is exactly why we put on this event. So maybe things are starting to change. And in this event, we are going to challenge some of those assumptions and show that meat-free meals are just as easy to make, just as tasty and full of nutrition. We're not advocating that you need to be vegan overnight, but maybe we want to inspire you to maybe try and replace a few meals of your meaty meals with vegetarian options. And speaking as a meat eater who is mostly vegetarian now, I can say that I don't actually really miss the meat. It's more the idea of it. But when I do have meat, which tends to be when I eat out, it's actually become a bit more of a treat for me. So yeah, it is possible to cut down on your meat if you have a go and you really want to. Okay, so that's the end of that. But Iain, do you have anything to say on the back of any of that, or you just want to move on to recipe number 1?
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. It's discovering what other options are out there. So hopefully we'll be able to bring a few of them to the forefront through the session.
Perfect. So would you like to introduce our first dish then?
So this is a lentil bolognese. We're starting with a dish that's probably recognisable to most people. So it's made exactly the same way as a meat bolognese, just replacing the meat with lentils, which are high in protein, fibre. So see what you think.
And don't forget to pop your questions in the chat box if you have any. Okay, here we go.
Right, welcome to Meat-Free Cookery. The first recipe we're going to be doing is a bolognese, but we're going to be replacing the meat with red lentils. So, start off first, a hot pan, just a little bit of oil. Just wait till the oil's getting hot, and it'll be the onions and garlic going in first. So these are just chopped white onions. You can use red onions if you wish. So onions and garlic going in at the beginning. We've also got some herbs. These are fresh herbs, but dried mixed herbs are just as good to use. So we're looking just to get a little bit of colour on the onions, not too much, and the garlic as well. That's the onions starting to sweat off now. You can hear them sizzling away, so that's a good sign. And the fresh herbs been in there, and all the flavours are going to be coming out of them. The next thing we're going to be putting in is a little bit of tomato puree. A tablespoon. We've also got some smoked paprika. You start to smell all the aromas in the pan now, the garlic, the herbs, smoked paprika, the onions. Just want to coat the onions and garlic nicely. So after that's happening, we've got a little bit of yeast extract. You don't need to add this if you don't have it, but it adds just a little bit of depth of flavour, not too much, half a teaspoon. This just gives a real depth of flavour. Grated carrots, we'll put in next. You can really add as much different types of vegetables as you have or want. Other vegetables that work well, mushrooms, you can either grate them or chop them, courgettes. We just want to cook this for 2 or 3 minutes just to soften the carrots a little bit. Next thing in is the lentils. Then I'll put the chopped tomatoes in. Combine all this. The last thing to go in is some vegetable stock. Add this. A lot of mix. Trick to this is just to make sure you've got the right amount of liquids for the lentils. You don't want it to be like lentil soup, too wet. Again, you need enough liquid for the lentils to cook. If you get it just right, the texture will be what you're familiar with, like a meat bolognese. With other flavours of the vegetables and the herbs. It really is delicious. This can be made into lasagnas, anything that you would use a meat bolognese, easy just to use this instead. So we're just cooking this until the lentils are just soft. As I say, we don't want them to break down too much and become like a soup. So after about 10 to 15 minutes, we'd always check the lentils after 10 minutes. We'll still have a little bit of a bite to them.
Maybe 2 doses, but you're not going to be,
so the lentils
or it shouldn't be.
just a little bit of a bite. Don't need to season it now. Salt, black pepper. I do like black pepper. Just mix that together. You see it's a nice consistency, it's not too wet, it's not too dry. You do find your lentils are not cooked and it's like this, and you just add a little bit
We
more.
currently don't have it in patient. We do see it
So ready.
outpatient. I haven't been in clinic yet, so I haven't seen it firsthand. I do know that a lot of people so when we're treating hyperkalemia inpatient, we use medical management,
Bolognese on top. So there we go, that's the finished dish. Lentil bolognese with spaghetti. And this can be finished by a sprinkle of parmesan, or you can use extra virgin olive oil. And that's it. Much recommended. So say you can make lasagnas out of this. Delicious.
Okay, that looked amazing. I'm sorry I wasn't here to help you film it and get detail like last time. Okay, Jennifer, I think some things have come into the chat box. Is there any questions there that Iain could maybe answer now? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
A question from Alexis Powell in America. She has a problem with eating cheese and she has an allergy to nuts. So she's concerned about getting enough nutrition and asking if we have any ideas for someone who can't have cheese or nuts. And she doesn't like that some versions of nut-based products are, of nut-free versions are full of potato starch. So again, not a lot of nutrition in it. So what about nutrition for Alexis?
The dairy-free cheese world is one that I'm currently exploring. I would have to say I've no real options for you there. A lot of the dairy-free cheeses contain the yeast extract as a sort of flavour. I haven't seen as many with nut products. I wasn't aware of that, but I will have to look into that. I can't give you any alternatives off the top of my head, I'm afraid, though.
So what other vegetables would have more protein, I guess, is what she's looking for?
To replace protein rather than replacing cheese, that's a little bit easier. Like your lentils, your chickpeas,
right,
some grains, quinoa. There's a number of ingredients to use protein, but replacing cheese, I think, is tricky.
Sure. I think I'm right in saying that some seeds have got high protein value. I don't know whether if you're allergic to nuts, if you're also perhaps allergic to seeds, but are there some, would you recommend seeds?
Yeah, well, there's most seeds, quinoa particularly, that contains some complex proteins. Don't want to go too far into it because I don't know too much more than that, but complex proteins are what your body needs, whereas some meats and other vegetables contain like part protein. So there's certainly plenty alternatives to replace protein, and that goes on further than this.
Right, and somebody else mentioned or questioned the possibility of nutritional yeast. Is that an option?
It's the yeast extract that's used for the flavouring, which I think it was natural yeast, was it not?
Okay. Apart from that, people are just saying the meal looks delicious. I would heartily agree with that. Someone's asking which types of lentils, and also do lentils, and I would have thought the same thing, do lentils not require a pre-soak? But you didn't soak your red lentils, did you? No?
No. You don't need to soak them. Things like dried like split peas and things like that, you would recommend to soak them. But red lentils are that small, they'll cook perfectly. Just give them a wee rinse first. That's it, no soaking. If you soak them, it tends to soften the lentil itself and therefore can overcook a lot quicker. But other lentils, puya lentils or green lentils are great. They tend to hold their shape a lot more, so you could cook them further for more flavour. They're my favourite.
Presumably, all lentils would have the same nutritional value.
I presume so. I'm not a nutritionist, but lentils are generally high in protein.
Yeah.
And really good for you.
Yep. Okay, that's all the questions then for the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, you two. So I think now I'm afraid it's time for a bit of a depressing slide I'm going to share with you. It's the reasons why we need to cut down on the amount of meat that we eat across the globe. So let me just share my screen with you once more. So basically, the reason that we need to cut down on the amount of meat that we're eating across the world is that intensive livestock production is a major contributor to greenhouse gases and to global warming. As you can see from the graphic on the left there, it's about 50% of global emissions. This is according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. So I mean, it's right up there with some of the worst carbon contributors that we have, just beaten there by electricity and heat in our homes. And the main greenhouse gas that is produced by livestock is actually methane, which mostly comes from cattle, and it's actually burped out by the animals rather than coming out of the back end, which a lot of people think is actually it's a burping problem. And with global meat and dairy production set to double by 2050, as more nations switch to a more meat-based diet, we really need to take action to help hit those targets that we need to hit for carbon reductions, as well as taking action, of course, on all these other things. I'm not unfairly putting on livestock here. We've got to take actions across all aspects of our life. But some sustainability experts suggest that we should cut our meat intake by about 50% and double our fruit and veg, and that will help us to avoid a climate catastrophe and also mean that more people can eat well and eat better. And on the right-hand side of the picture there, you can see just how intensive meat production is. So, you know, to make one burger takes a whole lot of water. So 6 months of flushing the toilet, 3 months of showering. I think this graphic came from the Californian drought period, where they were struggling to save water, and they really wanted to highlight what they could be doing. And it does take a lot of resource and space as well. So apparently it takes 12 kilograms of grain fed to livestock to produce 1 kilogram of beef. So that's a whole lot of resource going into creating not that much food. And many people believe that instead of feeding this grain to cattle, pigs and chickens and other animals, we should actually use that land and use those cereal crops to feed people instead. So then you're tackling two problems at once. And of course, when you're thinking about livestock, it's not just the climate that's impacted, but with intensification and expansion and overfishing, these are major factors in biodiversity loss and extinction of species. And especially because a lot of cattle ranching in many parts of the world happens in such biodiverse areas, such as our Amazon rainforest. And in order to create these vast ranches, we cut down beautiful virgin forest. And not only are we cutting it down to house the animals, but actually they are fed a lot of soya to keep them going, and that soya requires more forest to be cut down. So the Amazon, we call it the lungs of the world, and it's a major CO2 sink, but it's all being cleared, burnt and cleared for cattle. And it's estimated that 90% of the world's soy is fed to livestock. So we do eat some of it ourselves, but most of it is actually going to the animals. So yeah, we know that there's a huge environmental impact of meat, and we can all do our bit, but it does come with some extra wins. So as well as helping the environment, you'll find that actually it makes us a bit healthier if we eat less meat. So more peas, less disease. And a study that was done in 2010 by Oxford University's Department of Public Health found that if the UK ate more meat, eating meat-free 3 times a week would prevent 31,000 deaths from heart disease, 9,000 deaths from cancer, and 5,000 deaths from strokes. And it could save our NHS £1.2 billion just by changing our diet. And of course, we'll save money if we switch to plant-based. So plant-based proteins typically used to replace meat, such as beans and lentils, like in our last recipe, they are hugely cheaper than meat. And it's reckoned that in the UK, we spend about £16 a week on meat. So if we didn't spend all that on meat, we'd have a bit more money in our pockets to spend on other things. So that's a couple of extra wins, as well as helping the environment, doing a bit of a climate change. We'll be healthier and we'll be a little bit richer. Okay, so that's the depressing slide of the evening. So I'm now going to hand back to Iain to introduce our next recipe and make us a bit happier, please.
Next is the risotto. This is a great dish to have in your armoury if you're looking to move away from meat. Rice is a great filling, satisfying food, but it's sometimes quite tricky to make into something quite luxurious. This can be, so have a wee look. Going back to the cost point that Craig raised, and for the lentil bolognese, the portion of lentils I used probably cost about 15-20 pence, whereas the equivalent of beef mince and that would have been around about £2. So a lot cheaper.
Right, so the next recipe we're going to show you is a risotto. This is going to be a mushroom risotto. Risotto is a versatile dish. It's good for using leftovers, so it's really good for waste. And vegetables tend to work really well with it. So we'll do a mushroom one, and we can talk about different types of risottos. Right, so to begin with, be the onions and garlic. Fair amount of oil to begin with. So in with the onions. Finely chopped onions, the finer the better really. We want the onions to almost dissolve away. We want big chunks. And with the garlic also. So this should just be on a medium heat. We're trying to soften and cook the onions without getting any colour on them. So this does take a few minutes, so about 4 or 5 minutes. And just start them off at a higher heat, then just reduce it and just keep an eye on. When the onions have started to soften, then we'll add some. We're going to use an olive oil spread rather than butter. So you don't have to stir the onions all the time, just keep an eye. A lot of it has to do with temperature control, so having the gas on it or the electric on it, the right heat, means you will cook your onions without getting them coloured. So we'll just give that another minute or two. We chose this recipe because risottos do lend themselves really well to working with vegetables, and if you're looking to replace meat in your diet, it's a really good dish for that to happen. Butternut squash, garden peas, asparagus, everything. It really is a great vegetarian dish. So one more minute and the onions will be ready. So that's the onions and garlic softened. So we're going to add a little bit of the olive oil spread. Obviously you could use butter for this. So this is just going to help the onions go to the next stage, just to get them nice and sweet and take the harshness out of the garlic. Yeah, and just keep an eye on the heat, just so we don't get any colour in the onions. You can see when you've added the olive oil spread there, there's a lot more sort of fat in the pan, so the onions are actually cooking better now. So that's nice and soft. So mushroom risotto, this is when we put the mushrooms in. So we want looks a lot of mushrooms, but they will cook away to very little. I've got some rosemary here as well. Lots of herbs work great with mushrooms, tarragon, especially thyme. Again, if you've got dried mixed herbs, just a little bit of that, and at this stage I'll just add a bit of a different sort of level of flavour into the dish. Right, so a wee trick here is if you put a sprinkle of salt over the mushrooms, it just helps to withdraw the moisture. These are just button mushrooms. There's many varieties of mushrooms out there nowadays. The wild mushroom selections you get are really quite good, especially if you're maybe trying to introduce people into mushrooms that don't like them, because they've got varied textures, tastes. They do vary quite a lot, so it's worth experimenting with mushrooms if it's something you're not too keen on. So you can see the mushrooms are starting to cook away now. So this is like the base for your risotto. We're just going to add the rice now. So this is arborio rice. There's other types of risotto rice. It's basically a short grain rice. So we put this in. It doesn't look very much rice for the amount of mushrooms and onions, but by the time that's cooked, that will change right. At this stage, just want to keep an eye on the grains of rice. Keep an eye on the heat, maybe a medium heat. And we're wanting the grains of rice to absorb these sort of base flavours. And you'll start to see the grains of rice going translucent. And that's when to start the next stage. If you had any white wine lying around, now would be the time you would add that for the rice to absorb that flavour as well. They're not using wine today. Just going to see if I can get a grain of rice in there, a couple of grains. See. So, I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but the grains of rice look translucent. And that's when we need to start adding the stock. So just a veg stock. So the key now is just to keep adding the stock a little bit at a time until the rice is cooked. So in with a splash to begin with. try and any grains of rice up the side of the pan, like to try and put them back down into the cooking process, just so you're not left with a raw grainy rice at the end. So you can see the liquid in there, that will soon be absorbed by the rice, and then we just continue to repeat the process until the rice is just perfectly cooked. The way to test if it's absorbed is if you just sort of pull your spoon through the rice. You should leave a clear just got a little bit more. So you can see that when you pull your spoon through the risotto, so it leaves a clear division. It means the rice has absorbed most of the initial liquid we've put in. So it's time to add the next. So I'm adding about 100 mils at a time, roughly. Just have your heat at low to medium heat. You don't want to be stirring it all the time. Go back to it every few minutes and give it a gentle turnover. If you continually stir, you'll start to break down the grains of rice, and it'll lose the texture that we're looking for. We want all the grains of rice to be nice and plump and tasty, and not all stuck together and overcooked. So I'll give that another 3-4 minutes, then it'll be ready for the next little bit of stock to go in. Right, so the risotto's been simmering away for about 10 minutes now. I've just been adding a little bit of liquid, same process, just looking to see if it parts easily. It's just a little bit. Now the rice is about 3/4 cooked here. You could take some of this out of the pan just now, lay it on a plate to cool it down quickly, and store it in the fridge, and it could be used at a later date. You just put it back in the pot, add a wee bit of liquid, and finish off as you would now. So it's a way of half cooking your risotto, so it's still perfect when you come to reheat it. So we're at the final stages now. See, it's absorbed most of the liquid. So just going to give it a taste for seasoning and to see just how far the rice is cooked. So rice has just got a tiny wee bite in it. I'd say about 2 to 3 minutes. How wet your risotto is up to you as well. Some people like it a bit less wet, so it holds together. Some people like it a bit more saucy. So right, so the final stage is really just getting the flavours. So taste again. Be aware, like stocks contain salt, so I'd say that's salty enough. Black pepper, and then you can see that's just about absorbed most of that stock there. And once you've made risotto a few times, you'll decide the texture that you want. As I say, everybody likes it a little bit different. You are looking for the rice just to have the tiniest bite in the middle. And that ensures the rest of the rice isn't overcooked and soft, which tends to make it go all gloopy. So that looks pretty good. So to finish, I'm going to add a bit of Parmesan. You can get dairy-free Parmesan nowadays. And a tiny wee bit of the olive oil spread. So, just going to gently fold this in. So it's looking perfect. I just want the cheese to melt and the spread to melt. That gives you a sort of silky finish to the rice. And there we have it. So, just going to plate this up. So there we have it, that's the mushroom risotto.
Okay, another fantastic dish, Ian, thanks very much. Jennifer, have you got any questions for Ian?
Yes, I have a few comments here. First of all, a question of my own, Ian. I'm wondering about your vegetable stock. The one thing that I really miss as a vegetarian myself nowadays is good old chicken stock. And some of the bought vegetable stocks are a bit salty and don't have enough flavour. Have you got any suggestions for, do you make your own vegetable stock or what do you use?
I do make my own vegetable stock on occasions. It's the vegetable stocks you do buy. They can be the criticism I have is they've got like a strange flavour that you can tell straight away that it's vegetable stock cubes. Using a bit less would help the salt content, but to make a vegetable stock, it's relatively easy. Just vegetables. If you bring water and wine, if you want to use wine, and herbs up to the boil, cover the vegetables, and if you leave that for a couple of hours, then strain it, and you can reduce that further to intensify the flavour of the vegetables. Sounds like a bit of work, but if you make a batch, then it can do for 3-4 dishes.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll give that a try. Thank you. Now, one or two people have been wondering about the availability of the recipes. And I think as we've been speaking, Craig has put up some of this. Am I right, Craig or Ian, in saying that you will be sending out the recipes, but also they will be available on the website. Is that correct?
So I've just popped a PDF of the recipes into the chat box, so people can just download it straight from there. And there's also a link to our website where the recipes are already up. And once, sometime next week, we'll get the videos attached as well, so you can rewatch them if you like. So what I'll do is I'll just send the link to the website in the email, I think, probably.
Perfect. You're so organised. That's superb. And one final point from Alexis again. She's asking for some advice on basic spices and herbs to stock up your kitchen, because when she goes to the supermarket, she's a bit baffled by the range and there's really too much choice. So Ian, could you give us just a core basic not too many herbs and spices that would cover a lot of dishes?
There's a few that pop to mind straight away. Garam masala, which are an Indian spice blend. I almost use that as a regular seasoning now. If you're cooking any food from Asia, even Mexican food, like garam masala is basically just a blend of core spices, which is great. Cinnamon I always have. That's a fully flavour. It really depends what kind of cooking you've got, but mixed herbs is quite a good thing to have. They work better in longer cooking processes rather than quick. Wouldn't sprinkle on a salad, but if you're making the bolognese, as I said, cooks a little bit longer, so all the flavours can meld a little bit. So the mixed spices, punchy ones like cinnamon and a garam masala, they would be the ones I would keep. And I see Craig's just shared their garam masala recipe, which is a taka dal recipe also. Lentils again.
Okay, that's all the questions then, so we'll crack on.
Thank you. I only remembered that we had that recipe online because I made it that time and it was brilliant. Yep, garam masala was really good, and I've still got lots left. So yeah, I just remembered about that. Okay, so it's back to me for a bit now. So I want to get us thinking about what it takes to produce different types of food, and also to maybe help you think about some small tweaks you can make to your shopping basket just to make it a little bit more climate friendly. So let me just see if I can successfully share my screen one last time. So I thought what we could do is we could play a little game. So we're going to have a little game of a bit of a flashback. We're going to have a game of play your cards right. But instead of playing with playing cards, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a food and how much carbon was released in producing just 1 kilogram of that food. And all you have to do is to tell me whether you think the following food has a higher or lower carbon footprint. So in true play your cards right style, I'm going to need you guys to let me know what you think. So I invite you to open up your mics now if you would like to. And all you have to do is let me know whether you think the answer is higher or lower. And if you'd rather not speak, you can always just type it in the chat box too. Okay, so just to show you, the first food we're going to think about is bacon. So this is UK bacon. And to produce 1 kilogram of bacon required the release of 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. So CO2 equivalent, carbon dioxide equivalent, is a measure that considers all the greenhouse gases that are released by the production of that food. So it could be carbon dioxide, it could be methane, it could be nitrous oxide or any other gas, but it's converted to a CO2 equivalent value. And what that does, it lets us compare different types of food in a fair way. So this CO2e, as we say, as it's written, takes into account farming machineries that's used, any fertilizers, packaging, anything that is used to produce this food. Okay, it's not exact, it's an approximation. And all the data on this game comes from a book called How Bad Are Bananas? The Carbon Footprint of Everything by Professor Mike Berners-Lee. So bacon is our starting point, our base card. What do we think? Has mussels got a higher or lower carbon footprint than bacon?
Lower.
Lower.
Oh, lots of lowers getting shouted. A couple of highers in the chat box.
Lower.
Lower, thank you all for playing along. Let's see what the answer is. We've gone too far. So the answer is lower, actually. So mussels are one of the lowest seafoods that you can buy when it comes to carbon dioxide. And the reason for that is that they are they're very easy to grow. So all you need to grow mussels is a rope in the ocean, and they can really cram onto these ropes, really pack in. They even grow on top of each other. So they have very little space. You don't need to feed them. They just get all their nutrients to grow from the sea. And of course, they already come in their own packaging. So you don't have any packaging costs when it comes to CO2 either. The shells do that for you. And as they produce the shells, they actually capture carbon. So they're actually taking some carbon out as well. So most of that footprint actually comes from the fuel for the boats to go out and collect the mussels in. So mussels are a really good seafood switch. If you want to eat seafood, but cut down on your carbon. Okay, next one. I think you might have got a little peek at this one. We're going for asparagus. Higher or lower? Has asparagus got higher or lower carbon footprint? What do we think?
Higher.
Lower.
Did you
Lower.
say
Lower.
it's just like being in the audience that play your cards right, isn't it? Okay, so the answer, you might have seen this, is, it's not working again. There we go.
What?
Whoa, that's the reaction I was looking for. Who was that? Was that Jennifer?
No.
18.5, because I might have forgot to mention that this asparagus comes from Peru. Because asparagus is not in season at the moment. So it has flown 10,000 miles on a plane, and because it's deemed as a perishable good, so they won't send it on a ship because it won't make it, they'll lose too much of the crop. So they fly it in from Peru, and it's 18.5 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of asparagus. So not great. So we'll carry our asparagus down to the next line, and we'll compare it to beef. What do we think? Higher or lower?
At least we don't fly it in.
So UK beef, yeah, we're not flying.
Lower.
Yeah, lower.
Lower, very confident lowers. 25 kilograms, it's actually higher.
Oh.
I think we've already touched on a lot of this. This is because of the methane that's produced by cows. You need to feed them through the winter, so you have to grow crops and then feed that to the cows. Remember, it was 12 kilograms of grain for 1 kilogram of meat. So there's a lot of resource, a lot of energy, a lot of effort goes into producing meat. And yeah, it's that methane come the gas. They've got 4 stomachs, so it's a lot of gas to produce, and they actually have a very different digestive system to pigs and chickens and other livestock. So that's why cows usually get picked out as the bad guys, I'm afraid. Okay, and on to the next one. So we're comparing beefed peas, lentils, and chickpeas. So all the pulses. What do we think? Higher or lower?
Lower.
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 Higher.
So it's much lower. So this is the kind of the heart of this event. Is that's why we're trying to ask you to replace some of your meat with these things that you can bulk out meals with. So that's your source of protein, and that'll give you your texture, your bite, and it will really bulk up your meal if you can switch to some of these things. They are coming from America, but they are being shipped. So that's a much lower carbon impact. So that's the difference between the asparagus and the peas and the lentils and everything. So let's carry over the peas and lentils and compare them to chicken. This is a free-range UK chicken, by the way. What do we think? Higher or lower?
Higher.
Yeah, higher.
Higher.
Perfect, you've got the hang of it now. So yeah, we are talking higher. This one I did find a few different results for in terms of the carbon. So it went from somewhere from about 3 to 6 kilograms. I think that maybe depends on the type of chicken that you're eating, but this was the number I got for a free-range one. Of course, if you went for a battery farmed one, the CO2 footprint does go down, but you've got all the welfare issues that go with that. So that's why I've gone for a free-range one. And remember, if you are lowering the amount of meat that you're buying, you can actually afford to spend a little bit more on the meat that you do buy. Do you have a little bit of cash in your pocket? So you can maybe go for the slightly fancier chicken than you would normally go for. Okay, next on the list is mushrooms. Higher or lower than chicken?
Lower.
Lower. Lower.
Lower, perfect. A few highers in there. Am I going to spring a surprise on you?
No.
Let me see. 4.1 kilograms. So it's surprisingly high considering mushrooms are grown in the dark in a cupboard. But I know, and remember, some of the chickens I did find were about 3 kilograms. So you know, you could argue that in some cases it might be higher. But if you have that risotto that Iain cooked with chicken in, and it's a free-range chicken like the one I've got on here, you're going to use more carbon. So this is the final page here. So mushrooms versus root vegetables. Mushrooms for 4.1 kilograms. I don't think it's going to come up, I'm afraid. What do we think? Higher or lower?
Lower.
Definitely lower. Lower.
Lower. Anybody else?
Definitely lower.
Yeah, this is one of the best foods in the UK to eat in terms of carbon footprint. So the reason that the root vegetables is so low is because they can be grown locally. So I buy my carrots from like 2 miles along the road. They have a really long season, so you can buy root veg in season in the UK 8 months of the year. They don't waste very much, so they last really well, they transport really well, they've got their skin on them already, they're protected, so food waste is very low. And they're very easy to grow. I think somebody mentioned it in the chat box earlier on, actually. You can grow these yourself in your garden, and that is going to greatly reduce the CO2 impact even more. So root veg, we're championing them. You can bulk out curries, you can bulk out your meals with some of these guys. No, controversial, the cheese. What do we reckon?
Higher.
Higher.
Higher, yeah. So nobody's going for lower, and you'd be right too, because of course they're attached to animals, and it's almost as bad as meat, worse than meat in some cases. And that's because you need to look after the animals, you need to feed the animals, and it takes a heck of a lot of milk to produce a small amount of cheese. So I think it's like 10 litres or something to produce just a small kilogram of cheese. It's not very resource efficient. If you still want to eat your cheese and feel better about yourself and lower your carbon footprint slightly, you can go for the softer cheeses, so things like Scots cheese and brie. So brie's carbon footprint is 8.8 kilograms, goat's cheese is 6.5, and that's because they're using less milk in the production process. But it's the hard cheeses tend to have a higher footprint. And this is where I struggle. I still have lots of cheese, I'm afraid, on my veggie dishes. And then the big finish, don't let me, is beef from Brazil. Is that going to be higher or lower than cheese? What do we think?
Oh, tricky.
Higher.
Higher. Higher. Higher.
Think about everything that goes into that meat to get it on our plates. Just a little bit higher. 83.3 kilograms. This is crazily high.
Wow.
Yeah, very shocking, isn't it? Really. I mean, considering the UK beef was 25 kilograms, we thought that was bad. This is even higher. So this is because Brazilian beef requires the clear felling of the Amazon rainforest to actually house the animals. But then you're also feeding them the soy, which requires more forest to be cleared. And all that carbon that would be drawn down by those trees is now in the atmosphere. And on top of that, you've also got loss of biodiversity. And then it's flown here from the other side of the world. So, I mean, you don't often see it on menus around here. Usually we go for British meat, but just in case you do, just think about the carbon. And it's not just Brazil. We're not, there's other countries as well that you can buy meat that's got high footprints for very similar reasons. But that just gives you an example of how bad it can be. Okay, so thank you very much for playing my game and playing along and being a good audience. Hopefully that has given you some information that you can use next time you go shopping. If you want to look at that even more, there is an article on the BBC website where I got a lot of those figures from, and there's a program on the iPlayer at the moment called Feast to Save the Planet, where they get different celebrities to order different meals and see what the carbon footprint is. So it's worth checking out if you want to look into that a little bit more. Okay, so I think what we'll do now is we'll go to Iain for an introduction to the final video, if we could. Iain, are you there?
Aye, so the last dish is Harissa roasted cauliflower, and we're serving that with a Moroccan style couscous. One of my favourites.
Right, today's recipe is going to be Harissa roasted cauliflower steak with Moroccan style couscous. So the first thing we need to do is to cut a steak out of the cauliflower. So we're looking to take the end bit off, trying to get a whole piece. It's a nice chunky piece. The other, depending on the size of the cauliflower, depends how many steaks you can get out of it. You'll probably get 2 out of this one. All the offcuts can be used in other recipes. Good roasted, good to make soup. So now we've got a piece of cauliflower, and this needs to be marinated. So I've got the Harissa marinade. It's a North African spice blend. It comes in dried or a paste. This was dried, so I've just added a little bit of olive oil. just make it into a marinade. So if you get a tray, you get your cauliflower. I'm just going to spoon that over. I've also put some fennel seeds in here whole. You can experiment with whatever spices you like for this. The North African sort of spices work well, smoked paprika, garlic. So once we've done one side, just put a wee pinch of salt in there also. Then turn it over. There's a little bit more in the back. And this could be marinated for 2 to 3 hours. So that's what we've got. So we'll put that to the side. And that. While the cauliflower's marinating, we'll make the couscous. It's really easy to make, and it's something that's underused. So equal quantities of couscous to boiling water. So I've got half a cup of couscous. So before we add the water, we need to add a little bit of flavour in at the beginning. So if you use a bit of tomato paste, and we use a little bit of, you can either use olive oil. I'm using the oil from some sunblush tomatoes. Just add this in. And we want to coat all the grains. Couscous expands quite a lot when cooked, so this will be more than enough for a portion. When you've got the grains coated in the oil and the tomato paste, I'm just going to add a zest of our orange. Orange goes well with all the North African, Moroccan flavours. So when you put that in, you can just give that a little slang. And then it's time to add the water. So just boiling water out the kettle. And you just need to. So this is the same amount of couscous. Water to couscous. Then you put the water in, stir it. It's worth adding a little bit of seasoning in it at this stage. Salt, pepper. And this just gets covered, set to the side. 10-15 minutes, and that'll be cooked. Right, so now the couscous is cooking away. We're just going to do the cauliflower now. So we've got a frying pan. Just a little bit of oil in there. Just a tiny bit because we've got some oil on the marinade. Be quite gentle with the cauliflower. So just into the pan. You have to be a little bit careful here that the spices don't burn. If they do burn, it'll make cauliflower really quite bitter. So really just trying to get a bit gentle colour, and we're going to finish this in the oven. So now the cauliflower's had a minute, you just have a wee look on the other side. Starting to colour nicely. Cauliflower is a good vegetable to use if you're trying to replace meat. It's got quite a southern texture there. And marinates well, char grill it, roast it. Really healthy for you, and just coming to the end of the season, but still good quality cauliflowers available. We'll just check, see the colour on the other side. See that starting to get a bit of colour on it now. So we've got our oven at about 200 degrees Celsius. Turning it every couple of minutes and you see the colour starting to appear around the edge. Don't want any more colour than what we've got in this here. Still to go into the oven for 10-15 minutes. Put this back on the tray that we marinated it. So this now goes into the oven. Right, so now the cauliflower is just about ready. We'll just have one last little look at the couscous. This is how it should look. All the grains nice and sort of separated, not all clogged and stodgy. It means it's been overcooked. So just put a tiny wee bit of oil in at the end. So we'll bring our cauliflower out. Right, so we can see that the cauliflower's got a nice bit of colour on it. Just turn this over. This is what we're looking for. So we'll put this to the side. So to plate up, the bowl here. Couscous can be served warm, or you can give it a little wee ping in the microwave just to heat it up if you prefer it more hot. So a little bit of couscous. Any left can stay in the fridge. 2 days it'll be fine in the fridge. Now we've got a piece of cauliflower. So to check the cauliflower's ready, just give it a wee knife. If your knife goes through it nice and easily, it's ready. The root part will be a little bit firmer than the florets, but that's fine, it's still good. So on here, cauliflower steak. We've got a little bit of the sun-blushed tomatoes just to finish it. A few wee coriander leaves just looking up. We'll take just a wee spoonful of the marinade, just a lot of flavour in there. There we have it. Harissa roasted cauliflower with Moroccan couscous.
Okay, another fantastic meal. I really like the tip about the couscous, equal part couscous to water, because my couscous either comes out like tasting like dust or it's like a soup. So I'm going to use that fact. That was really good. Are there any other questions, Jennifer?
We don't have any questions at the moment. I think everybody's just so impressed with that dish.
It looked really good, didn't it?
Amazing, absolutely amazing. I could ask a question myself. Can you tell me a little bit more about the harissa? I think you said paste. It's something I've never used, Iain. So can you tell me what's in it? How spicy is it? And what should I look for if buying it? Because I'd love to try that recipe.
Well, it originates from North Africa, Tunisia, I think, if memory serves correct. It's just a spice blend, similar to the garam masala in the Indian world. Areas from that part of the world tend to have their own harissa spice blends. It varies in spice. As I say, it's very much down to who makes it and blah, blah, blah. But it's worth checking out. It's a really good flavour. Check it out. It does come dried, or as I say, it does come in like a paste, which you can use just to spread on things or add to things. But if it is dried, then just add a wee bit of oil, then you can make it into something that's more easy to use.
Okay, that sounds great. Lots of comments coming in just saying thank you, it was amazing. People have really enjoyed it and I think are inspired with all those lovely dishes. There's one question, which is maybe for Craig, relating to the playing your cards game. Someone asked, do canned beans have a higher CO2 count than dried beans? So, I mean, there's a whole lot of different kinds of canned beans. Are we talking about baked beans or you know, canned mixed beans in brine, or what would you comment on that, either Iain or Craig?
So I would say it's probably not going to be a great difference because they probably are all coming from the same place and they're just being packaged differently. So, I mean, if you can get something in a tin, I would say it's probably going to be a lower carbon footprint than something in plastic because plastic is made with fossil fuels. I mean, and tin has got more potential to be recycled as well. So I buy tins myself, but I'm not sure 100% what the difference would be and whether it would be worth worrying about. I mean, I think generally the advice if you're trying to cut your carbon footprint is don't sweat the small stuff. If you're replacing beef with beans, it doesn't matter where they come from. It's going to be a better choice in terms of a carbon footprint.
Good point. Yep, absolutely. So again, it's just thank yous coming in and people keen to get the recipes.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll leave the chat box open, so if people want to copy and paste links and things from there, we'll leave a minute at the end where you can do that. But just pushing on because I realise that we're running a little bit over and we've still got one more slide to show. So maybe we'll be 5 or 10 minutes over, folks. If you're happy to stay on, that would be amazing. So I'm going to share my screen, and Iain, the next bit is me and Iain both sharing some top tips for cutting down on your meat. So let me just share my screen.
Right, so just a couple of quick things just to maybe help people move to eating less meat. So trying to reimagine your own dishes, like we did with replacing lentils with the meat. That's a really easy replacement to make. Other substitutes out there, we've got tofu, which does get bad press, but as Craig said earlier, 90% of it gets fed to animals. The other 10% is people. We've got corn for mince, a new popular one that's coming in as a meat replacement, or it's like falafels instead of meatballs. So that's made with chickpeas rather than meat. You can make things go a wee bit further if you're conscious of how much meat you're eating. Maybe just cut down your portion size. So breakfast is often a meal that's meat heavy. So maybe just reduce your sausages and bacon, have more mushrooms. Your body does require different nutrients, and often like colours represent different sort of qualities of nutrients and vitamins, etc. So If you've got a colourful plate, generally that covers all your vitamins. And don't have, if you are looking to eat less meat, don't go the full way. Try and do it gradually and ease yourself in. And I think self-education would be a great way to help your journey. Finding out what does have the protein, the high protein levels, find out for yourself. And there's lots of sources of information out there. So that's what I would have to say about that. Over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Ian. And then I've got a few more tips that I'm more kind of focused on the carbon side of things as much as the cooking. Cut back on meat and dairy. We've covered that throughout this event. And it's just about breaking that habit, really. And it's like any habit, it's quite hard to do. But you're more likely to stick with something if you're realistic. So don't go mad, don't go vegan overnight. It's not going to stick. Be mindful that you're only going to continue to eat vegetables if you're enjoying it. So don't be too hard on yourself, and just start from where you're at and make small steps, like Ian has already alluded to. Buy meat, less frequently, and when you do, buy the better stuff, so you're giving yourself a bit of a treat as well. That's another little tip from me. Egging each other on is really important. So change is easier when you've got somebody to help you through it. So find a buddy who wants to do the same thing, or get the whole family involved and make that commitment together. It's much easier if you've got the support. You can even cook each other meals, share tips with each other, and you're more likely to be inspired and engaged. And just remember that you're not alone if you want to cut down on your meat. There's a growing trend for it. And a study by the Eating Better Alliance found that 65% of people are willing to try and cut down on their meat in the UK. So you're not alone. We've already touched on local and seasonal food. So know what is in season. Look at the difference the asparagus made. 18.5 kilograms of carbon compared to maybe 1.5, I think, for UK asparagus. So just be aware of what's in season and buy local, support local businesses. If you are desperate to eat summer food in winter, then buy it when it's in season and shove it in the freezer. So things like berries, strawberries, blackberries, buy them in Scottish ones in season, get them into the freezer, and they'll come out with just as much nutrients and just as much taste in the winter time when you go to your freezer. So that's another little tip. Simply eating everything you buy, that's not a hardship, is it? That sounds amazing. Let's all eat our food. So a large part of our carbon footprint comes from food waste. And in the UK, we do waste a lot of food. And across the globe, we throw away about a third of all the food that we produce to eat. And it all releases methane whenever it rots. And 70% of food waste in the UK comes from people's homes. And that's a lot of waste, the energy, the resources, the effort that's gone into produce that food. And it could be eaten. This isn't food that is below par. It is stuff that could be eaten. So freeze food when it's getting near its use by date. If it's past its best before, it might still be edible. So check it, use your judgment, smell it. The best before date is nothing to do with safety. It's just saying the food might not be as good. So it could be perfectly edible. Think about portion sizes when serving up. Don't put too much on the plate because that's more likely to end up in the bin. Put the small portions and go back for seconds. And write a shopping list and stick to it. So a lot of the food that gets chucked is stuff that we get conned into buying because it's a 2-for-1 and we don't need it. So it ends up in the bin. It goes off before we've got a chance to eat it. We've talked about packaging a little bit. So buy foods that don't come in packaging. It's the same companies that are producing fossil fuels that make plastic. So you're only helping them out. And sometimes it's not required. Frustratingly, sometimes food that is wrapped in plastic is cheaper, but that's just the way it is. We need to get on it in the supermarkets about that. And some supermarkets are better than others. So shop around, find the one that you think is best. And plastic is a growing trend, sadly. So it'll be responsible for about 17% of carbon emissions globally by 2050. So it's something that we really need to, another habit we need to break. And then the last little one on there is to use low carbon cooking methods. It's not as complicated as it sounds. It just means boil your water in the kettle, not in the saucepan, because that's more efficient. Only boil what you need in that kettle as well. And when you're cooking, keep the lids on the pan. And you'll, apparently, if you don't, you waste 20% more energy and your food will cook quicker. Also, you can make the use of microwaves or slow cookers or pressure cookers. They're just more energy efficient. And the final point on that is, once you've heated the oven up, get the food in. Don't leave the oven on. I'm really bad for that. I'll stick the oven on at the start of cooking, and then 40 minutes later, I've still not put the food in. There's no need for that. I could have switched it on later. Okay, so there's a few tips on both sides of things, on the cooking side, for nutrition and everything, but also on the carbon side too. And like I've said before, don't be too hard on yourself. Don't sweat the small stuff too much. If you are making a decision for a good reason, then that is a good decision. The best thing you can do is to talk about what you're doing with your friends, with your families, because they're much more likely to listen to you than to some preachy guy like me. So talk about it in your communities, and that's the best way that you can make a difference, to get that conversation going. Okay, over to Jennifer for one last time. Are there any questions that have come in?
No more questions, just lots of thank yous. I think everybody's away off to their kitchens to try out some of these lovely recipes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so Iain, have you got any final comments?
No, I think we've covered everything. Just hope people give it a try, and if there's any feedback you want to give us or pictures, go for it. We'd love to see your efforts.
Yeah, please, share them on our Facebook page or on our Twitter, and on all this events and all the recipes and everything is up online, or it'll be going up on our YouTube channel. This whole event will actually. And yeah, like Iain says, do share with us if you try anything. So we're just going to finish. Like I say, I'll leave the chat box open there so you can copy any links that you want. If there's anything that's not there, do type in there and let us know. Recipes will be going on. This whole event will be on YouTube, so the recipes will be in there. And I'm going to leave you with a little song to sing us out from a very famous vegetarian, if I can successfully share my screen one last time. So thank you very much for coming, everybody.
Meat-free Monday, it's a fun day, and it's happening all around the world. Meat-free Monday, it's a fun day, and it's happening all around the world. Think about the future, how the world will be. If we don't do something, we face calamity. Think of greenhouse gases, melting polar ice, ocean levels rising, better not think twice. Meat-free Monday, it's a fun day, and it's happening all around the world. Meat-free Monday, it's a fun day, and it's happening all around the world. Think of too much livestock warming up the land. Gotta think of answers, gotta have a plan. Think about the future, how the world will be. If we don't do something, we face calamity. Meat-free Monday, it's a fun day, and it's happening all around the world. After Sunday, Meat-free Monday, and it's happening all around the world.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a good evening.